Hey guys, and welcome to a deck tech video for a deck I've been working on for a little while now, been cooking up in the kitchen, and I'm pretty excited to share with all of you today. So this is my Necrobloom Slime Against Humanity build. Necrobloom being, let's see if we can get it out of the way here. 1 mana and then a white, a black, and a green. That's Abzan. 4 total for a legendary plant creature. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. Create a 0/1 green plant creature token. And then Field of the Dead. Text, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, you instead create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And then the really cool piece of this card, land cards in your graveyard have Dredge 2. Dredge, of course, meaning if you were to draw a card, instead of drawing that card, you may instead opt to mill 2 cards from the top of your deck into your graveyard, and then return the card with Dredge from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a really cool card, new-ish as of the recording of this video. We'll get a little bit more into the details of why I have chosen this for my commander of the deck, but before we do that, let's really look at the centerpiece of the deck, which is a card called Slime Against Humanity. If you haven't seen it, you can read it right here. I'll go ahead and read it for you actually while we're at it. So it is 2 generic mana and a green for a sorcery that says, create a 0/0 green Ooze creature token with trample, put X/1/1 counters on it, where X is 2, plus the total number of cards you own in exile and in your graveyard that are Oozes or that are named Slime Against Humanity. And then the really important piece here is a deck can have any number of cards named Slime Against Humanity. So this deck, we are actually running 35 different Slime Against Humanity cards. And really what we are trying to achieve with this deck is to make some gigantic Ooze tokens with our Slime Against Humanity. Play 1 Slime Against Humanity for 3 mana, and let's try and make a 30/30 trampling creature, and then that's what we're going to use to kill our opponents. Now, in some sense, this is actually potentially could be called a combo deck, but the combos involved in this deck aren't actually going to be winning us the game. They are just there to set us up for making some gigantic Ooze tokens, and then it is up to our Ooze tokens getting through to our opponent's life totals. That's going to be what closes out the game in most cases here. So yeah, Slime Against Humanity, really cool card. One of the coolest features of this card that is something that you don't find very often on Magic cards in general is that this does not only count the number of slimes that you have in your graveyard, it counts the number of slimes that you have in exile, which is a really unusual piece of text to have on a card, and it opens up room for some very potentially broken lines, especially in black. So that's what we're going to be looking at first here, is what are some ways that we can put a bunch of our 35 Slime Against Humanities into exile easily. And it turns out there are a few ways that we can do that fairly easily. The first of which we're going to look at is potentially the spiciest. This is a very old, very infamous, very powerful card that has been in the format for a long time and has had many decks built around it for a long time. And by format, I mean in the game for a long time. I don't know how many Commander players actually play Doomsday, but here it is. It is a sorcery for 3 black mana. Search your library and graveyard for 5 cards. Exile the rest. Put the chosen cards on the top of your library in any order, and you lose half of your life, rounded up. So this is a pretty hilarious card. You are going to exile all of your library, all of your graveyard, except for 5 cards of your choice. Those are going to be the rest of your deck. Once you go through those 5 cards, you're probably going to lose the game. So what you're doing when setting up those 5 cards in this deck specifically is everything you can to try and end the game before you run out of those 5 cards. And there's some fun ways to do that. Sometimes what this is going to look like is setting that stack of 5 cards as just 5 Slime Against Humanities, which is kind of a hilarious play to make with Doomsday. And, you know, if you do that, you are then going to have 30 other Slime Against Humanity in exile. And another thing to note is that Slime also counts the number of other Oozes. We don't have many other Oozes in this deck, I will say. Unfortunately, as of right now, 2024, June, there aren't a whole lot of great Oozes that are playable. But I am running a Scavenging Ooze to hate on some graveyard strategies. There we go. So yeah, essentially if we play that Doomsday and exile all but 5 Slime Against Humanities and leave those 5 as the rest of our deck, we're going to have 30 Slime Against Humanity in exile plus a Scavenging Ooze in exile. And what that means is when we go to our next turn or draw a card of those 5 slimes, we're going to pay 3 mana to make, well, there's 31 in exile and then it adds 2, so we're going to pay 3 mana to make a 33/33 trampling slime creature. That alone is not going to be enough to end the game. Opponents will probably have a way to answer it, but you've got 4 more shots. The next one's going to be a 34/34 trampling creature, and then a 35/35 trampling creature, and the hope, plus any number of Slime Against Humanities you might have left in your hand as well when you play that Doomsday. That's another important piece to consider here. But the hope is that before you run out of the last 5 cards of your deck, you can use those gigantic Ooze tokens to kill your opponents and win the game. Now, one piece that may help with this when considering how to stack your 5-card Doomsday pile is Concordant. Here we go. Concordant Crossroads. This is 1 green mana enchantment. It's a world enchantment, which means it applies universally across the entire board. They don't make a whole lot of those anymore, but it says all creatures have haste. All creatures. My creatures, my opponent's creatures, everything. So obviously, this has potential to backfire a lot, especially when considering the Doomsday line, because Doomsday, as part of the cost, cuts your life total in half. So you're going to be pretty low life when you're trying to execute this plan. However, if you already have 1 or 2 Slime Against Humanities in your hand, and you don't need to draw one off of the top of your 5-card Doomsday pile, you can stack your Doomsday pile with this Concordant Crossroads, meaning that when you untap and draw, you will draw Concordant Crossroads. You can play that for 1 green mana, and then play your Slime Against Humanity that you had in your hand for 3, and all of a sudden you're already attacking for roughly 30 trampling damage that turn. And then the next turn, when you draw another Slime Against Humanity, that gets to attack also. So this is a very aggro route. I mean, playing Doomsday in general is a very aggro route. Obviously, you're taking a pretty big risk in doing so, but I think that is just so super fun. Like, I don't mind if I end up losing in that scenario. I'm taking a big risk, but if you can actually pull it off, it's going to be pretty epic. So yeah. Another thing to consider, maybe you want to stack your Doomsday pile with Concordant Crossroads. One other option with stacking the top of our deck that we'll get into a little later when we look at our tutor package as well. We do have 1 Terminus in the deck, so if you did want to stack if the board is just too cluttered, you're going to die on the crackback once you play this Doomsday, you can put the Terminus on top for that miracle 1 mana, wipe all creatures, and then start putting your slimes down onto the table. So that's another option when creating your Doomsday pile. So there's the Doomsday line. Risky, really, really splashy and cool. If you end up doing it, it's going to be awesome. Okay. Oh, I guess I should go into a couple other pieces here for the Doomsday, because you're going to go down to low life total. If you're worried about dying immediately when you go down to low life total, we are running a Swords to Plowshares. It's not going to be the best play, but if you are desperate, you could put that somewhere into your pile and end up exiling one of your own gigantic slime creatures to get back up to a healthy life total. That is an option that's there in case you need it. Alright, so how else are we putting slimes into exile? Doomsday is one. Another option that we have is a pretty spicy one. This is a card that you almost never see played in what is normally a singleton format of Commander. But in this case, it's really, really good. We are running a Surgical Extraction. So this is just 1 black Phyrexian mana. That means you can pay 1 black mana, or you can pay no mana and 2 life to cast this instant spell that says, choose target card in a graveyard other than a basic land card, search its owner's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name as that card, and exile them. Then that player shuffles. So if we already have 1 Slime Against Humanity in the graveyard, and this Surgical Extraction, that's basically all we need. We can then cast Surgical Extraction, targeting the Slime Against Humanity in our graveyard. That will exile it, and then we get to look through our deck and our hand and graveyard for any number, and that's the key piece here. A lot of people think this just gets rid of all of them. We don't have to pull all of the Slime Against, or any of the Slime Against Humanities out of our hand. Keep those in there, we're going to need them for later, but then you get the option to pull as many as you want out of your deck. And so usually you want to execute this line once you already have a decent amount of Slime Against Humanities in your hand, like 3 or 4, I would feel confident trying to go for this line. And in that case, if I have 3 or 4 slimes in my hand already, I might just rip all the rest of the Slime Against Humanity out of my deck. That means I'm never going to draw another one for the rest of the game. Hopefully the ones left in my hand are going to get the job done. And if they don't, again, this is a risky line, but it is a fun, explosive, and splashy line, and it's going to raise a lot of eyebrows at the table, and probably increase some heart rates of your opponents as well while you're at it. And also probably increase your own heart rate as well, because who knows if your slimes that you have in your hand are going to be enough to close that game out, but it's going to be fun trying to figure that out along the way. So Surgical Extraction, really cool card. It's basically 0 mana. You're paying 2 life to pull all of the slimes out of your deck once you have a healthy number of them in your hand. We have one other main way to put most of our slimes into exile, and this is a card that has so much stigma attached to it due to the broken combo potential that it has with Thassa's Oracle, Laboratory Maniac, the Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, I think it is. This is a CEDH card in those contexts. You probably know what I'm talking about. Let's see, there we go. So Demonic Consultation, you either love it or you hate it. A lot of people think it needs to be banned out of the format. This is pretty much the only time I can think that Demonic Consultation would be played in a fair way. So we're not going to win the game immediately with the Thassa's Oracle when we cast our Demonic Consultation. What we're going to actually be doing with this Demonic Consultation is naming a card that we know is in our deck that we actually want. We're going to use this as a real tutor. We are going to name a... let's think of an example here. We're going to name an Ozolith. So that way, if someone were to remove our gigantic slime creatures, the next one that we play is twice as big. We get to move all the counters over. This is something that we need for this scenario. So when we cast our Demonic Consultation, we're going to name Ozolith, and then we are going to hang on for dear life and hope that named card was not in the top 6 cards of our library. If it was, we are then going to just exile the rest of our library and promptly lose the game. You may be noticing a recurring theme here. We're not doing this for free. Yes, we're doing some broken stuff, but none of this is without its own risks. When we do this consultation line, there's a decent chance that we actually just kill ourselves with it. But if we don't, we will then exile cards from the top of our library until we hit that piece we were looking for, whatever card it was for the given situation that we need. In this case, we used Ozolith as our example. We will exile cards until we hit that Ozolith, put the Ozolith in our hand, and the rest of those cards are just going to be exiled, meaning that we probably exiled a good chunk of our Slime Against Humanities in the process. So yeah, that is an instant speed, 1 mana way to exile a good chunk of our deck and start making our slimes huge, while also fetching whatever the most important piece from our deck is at the time. So those are basically the 3 lines that we're going to use to put a bunch of slimes into exile. There is also a Demonic Bargain, which is a pretty spicy card that doesn't see a whole lot of play. It's a 3 mana sorcery speed tutor that lets you search for anything, but first you have to exile the top 13 cards of your deck. Normally that's a pretty big downside because odds are that you might hit the card that you're trying to look for and exile it. But in this case, this is just 3 mana, exile 13 cards, probably hit a good chunk of slimes against humanity, and then also a tutor on top of that. So that's a pretty cool way to get some slimes into exile. I guess while we're talking about exile, another couple of things that I want to touch on here are our potential pre-game actions. So we have a card that probably not a lot of people in the Commander format know about in Serum Powder, which is a 3 mana artifact. Mana Rock taps for a generic colorless mana. But it also says anytime you could mulligan and Serum Powder is in your hand, you can exile all the cards from your hand and then draw that many cards. So it's almost start on 7. I have my Serum Powder in my opening hand and 2-3 Slime Against Humanities. I'm just going to put all 7 of those cards into exile and draw a fresh 7, and then start the game with 2 or 3 Slime Against Humanities in exile, meaning the first one that I cast is already going to be a 3 mana, 4 or 5 trample creature. So that's pretty spicy. And we have another similar pregame action with a new-ish card, Devourer of Destiny, which says you may reveal this card from your opening hand. If you do, at the beginning of your first upkeep, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards back on top of your library and exile the rest. So again, you get to peek for a few Slime Against Humanities, potentially put up to 3 of them in exile before the game. Well, this one actually happens at your first upkeep. So not technically before the game starts, but before anything really gets going, you already have some Slime Against Humanities in exile. Yeah. So that is one of our game plans with this deck. Put those slimes into exile. Another game plan, another central piece is a more traditional graveyard strategy, which is just milling ourselves, putting those cards into graveyard. They count when they're in graveyards as well. And we have a lot of ways to facilitate that, but the really cool thing about viewing this as a graveyard deck is that most of the time a graveyard deck will just completely fold to a Bojuka Bog. It will completely fold to a Tormod's Crypt, to a Soul Guide Lantern, any kind of graveyard, to a Rest in Peace. Any graveyard hate is usually just going to end that graveyard player's whole game. This one, I dare my opponents to Bojuka Bog me. Who cares? Slime Against Humanity has gone from my graveyard zone into the exile zone. Doesn't matter. They still count themselves. So that's a pretty cool perk of playing this kind of deck, is you're pretty immune to graveyard hate, even when you're leaning into that graveyard strategy of milling yourself. So how are we going to mill ourselves with this deck? Well, we've got quite a few great options. We've got some really big, splashy mill options in Altar of Dementia, which is essentially just going to create a feedback loop. That first Slime Against Humanity that you cast, maybe it's just a 3/3 or a 4/4. If you sack that to your Altar of Dementia and mill yourself for 4 cards, you're going to get a few more Slime Against Humanities into the graveyard, most likely. And then the next one you play is bigger. Sacrifice that to mill yourself. And then the next one you play is bigger. And eventually you might even just be able to sacrifice your gigantic Slime Against Humanities to mill an opponent out. That's one other way to kill somebody with this deck, is swing a 35-30, swing 2 35-35 slimes at one opponent, knock them out, then sack both of them to your Altar of Dementia and mill another opponent out. That's a very real line that we can use here towards the end of the game. But in getting yourself set up, this is a really good way to mill yourself and get more slimes into exile. Another option we have for getting Slime Against Humanity into the graveyard is greater good. So this serves a few different really important roles in this deck. First of all, it's just a really great card draw engine, especially once we start making some big slimes. So this is a 4 mana enchantment that says sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, and then discard 3 cards. So what this is going to start to look like is sacrifice a 3/3 slime, sacrifice a 4/4 slime, draw 4 cards, and then discard 3 slime against humanity. Play another slime against humanity, make a 7/7, sacrifice that, draw 7, discard 3 slime against humanity. You sort of see where this is going. This is a really, really powerful card, and if you can get it to stick on the table, it's going to do work for you. So that's another way to get some slimes into the graveyard. We have Ripples of Undeath as another newer sort of pseudo card draw, card advantage mill piece. 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, mill 3 cards, and then you may pay 1 generic mana and 3 life, and if you do, you can put a card from among those cards into your hand. Even if you don't activate this, you're putting 3 cards into your graveyard. Probably one of those is a slime against humanity, given that just over a third of the deck is slime against humanity. So you're growing your slimes, and then if you need to, you can pay a mana and pick one of those milled cards and put them into your hand. Really, really solid piece here. Honestly surprised it isn't seeing more play. It almost just kind of reminds me of a black Sylvan Library that is also fueling graveyard strategies. So really, really cool card. And it's going to do a lot of work. What other ways are we putting slimes into the graveyard? Well, we have a lot of sort of value plays that are just going to help fix some of our draws while simultaneously putting cards into the graveyard, for example. Okay, sorry about that, team. I was having some technical difficulties for a moment, but we're just going to attempt to pick up where we left off there. So we were talking about different ways to put Slime Against Humanity into the graveyard. There are a few different ways that we can do that. We are running a Grizzly Salvage, which is just a really awesome utility card. 2 mana Golgari. For an instant that says reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You can put a creature or land from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. Given that we're only running, 6 creatures in this deck, we're probably not going to return a creature using that, but we can find a land that we need, and more importantly, put 4 other cards into our graveyard, hopefully many of which are Slime Against Humanity. Another really, really cool new piece that we're running in this version of the deck is Malignant Rumble. So this is just a common from Modern Horizons 3, 2 mana, 1 generic, and a green for a sorcery that says reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a permanent from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard, and then you create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn that you can sacrifice to get a colorless mana. So not only is this putting 3 or 4 cards into your graveyard, probably 3, and then you're keeping a land from among them. So it's putting 3 into your graveyard, a land into your hand, and then creating a spawn that you can then sacrifice for mana. This is a really sweet play on turn 2 in this deck, because it's going to mill some slimes into our graveyard, find our land drop for the next turn, and then we can use that extra mana once we play our land 3 on turn 3, and then sacrifice the spawn. We can actually cast our commander for 4 on turn 3 after a Malignant Rumble. So that's a pretty sweet line. Also just another really good value-centric way to put more Slime Against Humanity into our graveyard. We're running Life from the Loam. We aren't really leaning super heavily into the dredge strategy aside from just what our commander does with giving all of our lands dredge. But Life from the Loam is just too much value to pass up on. This is 2 mana for a sorcery to return 3 land cards from our graveyard to our hand, and then it has Dredge 3. So if you were to draw a card, and this is in your graveyard, instead you can mill 3 cards to return Life from the Loam from your graveyard to your hand. Most of the time this is just going to be 2 mana, draw 3 cards, get 3 lands back from your graveyard into your hand. Dredge it later to mill more in case you need to find more lands from your graveyard. And this is especially important because of how many fetch lands we're running. There's a Mesa, Bloodstained Mire. Let's see. Windswept Heath, Verdant Catacombs. Basically, you can pack as many fetch lands as you want to in another Fabled Passage. You can pack as many as you want to into this deck. I'm essentially running the fetch lands that I own. I don't have all of them. They can be pretty expensive. If you're going for a budget version of this deck, you could always lean into the Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse variants of these cards, but they're really good because not only are they going to give you 2 landfall triggers for your commander, meaning that you either get 2 plant tokens or 2 zombie tokens or some combination of the 2, but they also put themselves into your graveyard, meaning basically as long as you have your commander out for the rest of your game, you have the option, instead of drawing a card, to just put that land back into your hand and mill 2 cards. That's going to be a really cool way to put more Slime Against Humanity into your graveyard, and a really cool way to mana fix you as well and make sure that you're hitting those land drops. So the fetch lands are pretty important to this strategy here. Another reason why fetch lands are really important is because we're running all of these Surveil Lands. And so something really kind of cheeky that you can do on turn 1 is drop your fetch land, crack it, go find your Lush Portico, go find your Underground Mortuary or your Shadowy Backstreet, depending on what colors you need. And then when that enters, you get to Surveil 1, meaning if you have a slime on top of that library, you get to throw it straight into your graveyard for free, and you're already off to the races. You already get your first slime that you cast is going to be 1 larger than it would have otherwise been for almost no opportunity cost. You were just mana fixing. So that's a pretty cool line that you can take with just your lands. But basically that is the gist of how you're going to be milling yourself in this deck. However, there is one more really important piece, and the main reason why we are running the Necrobloom as our commander. You may have been wondering, I mean, yeah, it's got your colors, but like, why not some other kind of Abzan legend? Really, the main reason why we're running the Necrobloom as our commander here is because of its combo potential with a card called Fluctuator. Fluctuator is a 2 mana artifact that says cycling costs you up to 2 less to play. So basically reduces all of your cycling costs by 2 generic mana. This is really, really cool when all of your land cards have Dredge, because you got Polluted Mire, you got Slippery Karst, you've got Drifting Meadow, and you even have Scattered Groves. That's 4 lands you could pack into this list. You could even pack I believe it's Blasted Landscape. We're not running that one because it taps for a colorless mana, but you could run up to 5 lands with a cycling cost of 2 generic. So what that means is if you have the Necrobloom out on the field, if you have Fluctuator out on the field, and then if you have one of those free cycling or 2 mana cycling cards in your hand, all of a sudden it is free to cycle this Polluted Mire. So what you can actually do is you can pay 0 mana, discard Polluted Mire to cycle it, and then instead of drawing the card off of the cycling activation, because Polluted Mire is in your graveyard and it has Dredge 2, you can mill 2 cards from your deck to put it back into your hand. And this creates a semi-infinite loop that you can do as many times as you like, basically until you run out of cards in your library. You can cycle the Polluted Mire for free, dredge 2 cards from your deck into your graveyard, return it to your hand, cycle it for free, dredge 2, return it to your hand, and do that as many times in groups of 2. You can mill 2 cards, and then mill 2 cards, and then mill 2 cards as many times as you want. Generally, you know, I like to, as you can probably tell by the nature of this deck, I like to play things a little risky. I don't want the guaranteed win, but I want to make the splashiest play possible. So I'll probably mill most of my deck. When I have this opportunity, I'll mill most of my deck until I have a few cards left, and then, you know, hopefully I have some Slime Against Humanity in my hand, and maybe hopefully there's a few left in the deck. You don't really know, you're not controlling what's left in your deck because you're just milling yourself. But once you put most of your deck into your graveyard, that's another way that you can have some gigantic slimes to then beat your opponent's faces in once you start casting them. So that's the main reason why we're running Necrobloom, is for that combo. There's very, very little opportunity cost to running. I mean, those lands, they enter tapped, which is a little bit of a bummer, but otherwise they're just part of our mana base. That's 4 combo pieces in our mana base, 1 combo piece in the command zone. So the only combo piece that we're sort of being forced to run in the 99 that's taking up a slot is that Fluctuator. It doesn't really do much otherwise, but that's just 1 slot. And we are running a pretty healthy tutor package to go try and find that when necessary. And that's, I think, what I want to get into next here, is what we're doing with tutors. I know that's a pretty controversial card type in the format of Commander. Some people are very anti-tutor, and I would say that generally I do lean towards running less tutors unless you're trying to play really competitive power levels. However, this deck is trying to do one thing, and that one thing is to make gigantic slimes. And so in order to do that most consistently, I am running some tutors to help find my Doomsdays, my Demonic Consultations, my Fluctuators, my Altar of Dementia, whatever is like whatever I decide is the best shot at making some gigantic slimes based on the board state and what's going on in the game. So as I had mentioned earlier, we are running the let me move this up here. We are running the Demonic Bargain. So that's exile 13 cards, probably hit some Slime Against Humanities, and then go find what you need from there. We are also running just the classic Demonic Tutor, really powerful piece. Again, if you don't like tutors, you can replace these with other cards, although I would recommend running the Bargain regardless because of that exile 13. We are running a Vampiric Tutor. This is 1 black mana instant. Search your library for a card, shuffle, put that card on top, lose 2 life. This is another reason why I decided to include Terminus in the deck. We're only running 2 board wipes. We'll get into that a little bit later. I decided on Terminus because we can either set it up with a Doomsday pile to get that miracle, or we could set it up with a Vampiric Tutor if need be, if the board's just getting too out of control before we can start getting our big slimes online. It feels pretty good to just pay 1 mana to put all creatures on the bottom of their owner's libraries. So yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing in terms of tutors. One other pseudo tutor that we're running is a new one, newish one, Pillage the Bog, 2 Golgari, sorcery. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is twice the number of lands you control. Put 1 into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Early game, this is probably just going to be a cantrip-esque ability where you get to dig a few cards deep, find one of those cards that you're looking for, and put the rest on the bottom. Later on in the game, this is going to dig 10, 20 cards deep, and then it's essentially at that point a tutor. And if not, it'll find you a tutor to get exactly what it is that you're looking for. So yeah, don't overlook this one. This is a potentially really strong ability. Even though it puts the cards on the bottom instead of putting them into your graveyard, it would probably be too broken if it put them into the yard. So yeah, Pillage the Bog, pretty cool pseudo tutor option here. So that honestly is the gist of the deck here. I'm just going to start like looking through other cards in the list and kind of like touch on some reasons why I'm running some of them, why you might want to run some of them, and we can go from there. So I did mention that we're running 2 board wipes. I can kind of start getting into the removal package here. There's not a whole lot of it. It's always hard to find room for removal, but I would encourage all Commander players to find room for removal. It is so important, and it keeps the other players of the table rather in check while you're trying to do whatever it is that you're trying to do. So we have the Terminus. We also have Tragic Arrogance. This card is just, in my opinion, so underplayed. It is so powerful for what it does for 5 mana. It's a 5 mana sorcery. For each player, you choose from among the permanents that player controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker, and then each player sacrifices all other non-land permanents they control. So this is cool for so many reasons. One of the reasons being that obviously you get to be the one to choose which cards your opponents keep and then which cards you keep. Most of the time, these kind of abilities let the opponents choose, so having that ability to choose for them is huge in this scenario. Obviously, you're just going to choose, okay, you get to keep your 1 token creature, your 1 mana rock that taps for just a mana, and then if you have an enchantment, whatever the worst enchantment, and maybe it's a Wicked Roll, and you keep that. Another reason why this is really cool, it gets around Indestructible, it gets around Hexproof. Choosing is not targeting, so, it gets around Shroud. But yeah, it gets around Indestructible, Regenerate, anything like that, they are sacrificing those permanents. So even a heroic intervention is not going to stop this Tragic Arrogance because you are choosing, you're not targeting, and they're sacrificing, so the Indestructible is irrelevant. So really, really sweet board wipe option here. I'm honestly surprised it doesn't see more play. It's usually my go-to when I am in white. Other than that, some of the other removal that we're running is obviously we have the Swords to Plowshares, mentioned that a little earlier. You can use it on your own slimes to gain life if you're in a pinch, but ideally you do want to be using this to remove one of your opponent's biggest threats for just 1 mana, staple of the format, fantastic card. One other spicy piece that I put into the list here is Urgent Necropsy. Another newer card, again, as of the recording of this video. This is 4 mana, so kind of pricey for a removal spell. However, it does so much, especially here in this deck. So it's 2 generic and 2 Golgari for an instant. This says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, collect evidence X, where X is the total mana value of the permanents that this spell targets. When you'd say, well, the permanents that this spell targets, well, it targets multiple permanents because you can destroy up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, up to 1 target enchantment, and up to 1 target planeswalker. So essentially, as long as you can collect enough evidence for this card and you have the targets, this can be a 4 mana destroy 4 of your opponent's things. Which is pretty fantastic, especially at instant speed. And the thing about collecting evidence is you have to exile cards from your graveyard and then count their mana value to basically create X. And normally that's a pretty big downside for graveyard decks because you don't want to be exiling your graveyard. Again, it does not matter in this deck. If you exile 3 Slime Against Humanities from your graveyard with this, suddenly X is 9. You can target 9 mana value worth of different permanents, destroy them, and you don't care that you just put those cards into exile. They are still counting themselves because of the nature of Slime Against Humanity. So I think that this is a pretty spicy piece of removal, especially for Slime Against Humanity decks. Let's see. Other than that, that is pretty much what we're doing in terms of removal. Although I guess what I should get into now is another one of the really cool perks of running Necrobloom as the commander is Channel Lands. So technically we do have an Iganjo, Seat of the Empire, and this can very much count as a piece of removal. It is a land that comes in untapped and taps for a white mana, or you can pay 3 mana, 2 generic and a white, to discard it, and it deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. And then this costs 1 less for each legendary creature you control, so if you got your commander out, it's going to cost 2. Not the most efficient removal spell, but the fact that you can run it in a land slot is already pretty fantastic. And then in this case, if you channel it, blow up an attacking creature, deal 4 damage to it, it's in your graveyard. Next time you draw a card, if you want, you can just dredge that thing right back into your hand and use it again later, or play it as your land drop for turn. So these channel lands are really, really powerful, especially in the Necrobloom deck. That's why we are also running a Buseju who endures. This is another piece of removal that you can just use over and over as long as you have your commander out. Takenuma is probably the least powerful option in this deck because, as I mentioned before, there's only 6 creatures in the deck, so you're probably not going to be returning a creature off of this, and you're definitely not going to be returning a Planeswalker because we are running 0 of them. However, if you're in a pinch and you need to be milling some cards, you channel this and you mill 3 cards, and then you dredge it and you mill 2 more cards. So this is another sort of mill engine for your deck that you can just fit nice and cleanly into your mana base. So that's kind of what's going on. We got a little back into mill there with Takanuma, but I brought those channel lands up because they can be technically counted into our removal package, at least the white and green ones. So that's kind of what we're doing for removal in this deck. Let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to touch on? So, okay, so we have a, let me move this a little bit. We have a Disciple of Bolas for card draw. When it enters the battle, 4 mana, 2/1 creature. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice another creature, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is that creature's power. If you have a big slime on board, you can drop this, gain 10 life, draw 10 cards. That's going to feel pretty good. And then when you have to discard to hand size, you just put some more Slime Against Humanities into the graveyard and start making them even bigger. So this can help get you back in the game when you're at a low life total. It can refill your hand for you. There is another variation of this that came out recently that, again, we're just running this as a land, Disciple of Fraelis. It is a MDFC, meaning on the back, it is a... Let's see if I can show it here. Just a green land that enters tapped, taps for a green mana, or you can pay 3 life to have it come in untapped. So this is basically a forest slot, but if you need it, again, later in the game, if you have to draw some cards or gain some life, it is a 3 mana, 3 green mana, so 6 total, 3/3 creature. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature, and if you do, gain X life and draw X cards, where that card... X is that creature's power, so same thing as the Disciple of Bolas. We're running basically 2 copies of that card. For card draw, we also have an Esper Sentinel. Really just good, valuable draw piece in the format of Commander. As we mentioned earlier, the Greater Good is going to help draw cards. The Ripples of Undeath is going to help draw cards. And that's kind of what we're doing for our card draw package. Other than that, let's see, is there any spice that we missed on this one? That's pretty much what we're doing with this deck. I suppose one other piece of spice that I can show you guys is this Harmonious Archon. So we're not doing a whole lot with the plant tokens that our Necrobloom is going to be making for us, or with the zombie tokens that our Necrobloom is going to be making for us. So one cool thing is to have some kind of overrun effect to just kind of get somebody out of nowhere with those little 0/1s that have been accumulating over the game that they didn't really think twice about. And a cool way to do that, especially in this deck, is with this Harmonious Archon. It is a 6 mana creature Archon. It is a flying 4/5 creature. Non-Archon creatures have base power and toughness 3/3. And when it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 human creature tokens. So there's kind of a lot going on here. The first thing to note is it doesn't say non-Archon creatures you control. This is just non-Archon creatures. If your opponents have some big bombs out on the board, this is going to shrink them down to 3/3s. Alternatively, if they have a really wide board of 1/1s, this could have the potential to backfire by buffing all of those up to 3/3s. But really what you're trying to do with this card is do that to your own board. So let's say you got 5 0/1 plants on board just from playing lands over the course of the game. This is going to come down, turn all of those plants into 3/3 creatures. Right. Once again, sorry about that technical difficulty. It would appear that my device was not built to handle this level of yapping, and likely neither were you, so I promise we're going to wrap it up pretty soon here. We were talking about this Harmonious Archon. Essentially what I was saying is it buffs all your tokens into 3/3s. It makes 2 more tokens that are going to become 3/3s. And the really cool thing about this also is your Ooze tokens technically have power and toughness of 0/0. So that's going to make them into 3/3s, plus all of the +1/+1 counters that they have on top of them already. So it's going to buff all of your slimes +3/+3 as well. This Archon will probably take some opponents by surprise, give you the opportunity to get some kills out of nowhere, and it's a pretty sweet overrun ability for this deck in particular. One other thing that I want to touch on is I realized that this deck list was not entirely up to date with my actual deck, and in the earlier segment before we cut out here, I had a Dark Ritual in the instant slot. This was a relic of an older version of the deck. I don't think that running Dark Ritual is actually a great call, especially in this 3-color deck. What I am running instead that I had neglected to actually include on this list before is a sorcery card called Essence Harvest. Let's see, there we go. Essence Harvest, which is a 3-mana sorcery. Target player loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. This is a really cool sneaky card that, again, can get somebody out of nowhere. If you have a 30 power slime on board, you can just essentially usually kill someone with this and gain 30 life back. So that's a pretty sweet piece of tech here. With that being said, I have talked your ears off, probably both of them, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. Thank you so much for staying to the end if you ended up making it this far. I hope you learned something about some technology you can use with this sweet Slime Against Humanity card. If you enjoyed the content, please give the video a like. Leave a comment about different ideas that you have for this deck as well. I'm always eager to hear other ideas within the community. Subscribe to the channel, please, if this is something that you're interested in. It is my hope to do some more deck tech videos like this for other decks that I have, as well as just talking about some other Magic content. So you can look out for that moving forward on the channel. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great rest of your day or night. All right, take care.